He may need to sleep with you guys tonight, Daniel. I don't know. Oh, what else? What else is new? I don't know. Anyway. All right, Genesis. Actually, no, we're not going to start in Genesis. We're going to end up in Genesis 39. But I want you to start by going to Romans 8. One of my favorite things to do is take verses you know that the world has totally messed up and help you see them perhaps a little clearer. This one you may know already. But I want you to turn to Romans chapter 8, verse 28. I saw a post the other day which I thought was really great. Somebody commented and said, "For I can do all things through any verse taken out of context." And I thought that was a great quote. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And I know you've heard this verse, but let's make sure we understand it. Let everybody get there. Doesn't Cody look good with his haircut and beard trimmed?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm telling you. Fine looking man. Don't lead him astray, Aaron. I saw that lies. Don't let him do that to you. All right, Romans 8. We're looking at verse 28. Okay, Caleb, because you're my friend, I want you to read it. You've got one friend in here.
We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose.
All right, how many of y'all have heard that verse before? Everybody, right? Most of you hear the first half of the verse, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good. That's really what you hear. You usually don't even hear the "and we know" part. You mostly just hear God causes all things to work together for good. That's kind of the general quotation of that verse. And if quoted like that, it sounds like there will never be anything wrong or bad occur in the world at all, right? Because God's going to make everything work for good. I mean, God's basically the writer of Hallmark movies. It has to end perfect. And you preach stuff like that, and you get in the world all these questions of, well, then why do so many bad things happen, right? And you get these cynics that say, well, God's doing a terrible job running this world because if everything's supposed to go for good, check it out, it doesn't. That's not what the verse says, right? You see the certainty in the verse. This is not a possible verse. This is a guarantee, and we know, okay? There's conviction there. And we know that God causes what things? What things? All things. God causes all things to what? To work together for good. For who? To those who love God. And he describes them another way. Those who are called according to his purpose. Now, we've talked about that part before, that this is not a universalist verse which says that God is, obligated to make everything work for good for all people. He's not. You see that. God is obligated to cause all things to work together for good for who? Those whom he has called. And how do you know if God has called you, according to this verse? You love God, okay? So we're dealing now with those whom God has saved. Those whom he has called from darkness into marvelous light. Those whom he has called from death into life. Those whom he's called from the dominion of Satan into the kingdom of heaven. He has called them to salvation. You know they have been saved because they love God. You'll find out in chapter 5 and at the end of this verse, the love they have for God is not even of themselves. It is a love which God has given them. It is actually the exact same love that Christ has for God, and that's the love that God has poured into the heart of those whom he has redeemed. It is a supernatural love, an unfailing love, a love that neither tribulation nor toil nor pain nor persecution can sever. Satan cannot cause you to quit loving God anymore. You now call God Abba, Father, and that's not just a term of intimacy. You call God what Jesus calls God. You are his son. You have the love of Christ poured into your heart that is distributed to God. It's a supernatural thing. You have been saved. You love God. And if that's you, God is obligated, promises, there's conviction here to cause all things to work together for good. You've probably heard that before. My next question here is, what does he mean good? That God obligated, according to this verse, for those whom he has saved, those who now love him, he is obligated, he is promised to cause all things, and that's a wide arena, all things must work together. There's a providence there that God causes all things to sort of come together, and it has to come together for good. What does good mean? Do what? All right, God's plan. It's a good answer. I mean, if I go out this week and there's a car wreck and I'm badly injured, and I say, but God's promise it has to work for good, what's the immediate assumption? I'm going to get healed. I'm going to get better. We like to fill in the blank of what is good. But does God give us any kind of clue or indication of what the good he's talking about means? And he does if you keep looking in verse 29. What's the first word of verse 29? For. What does that word do? You read English. Some of your dads and moms are in administration, so you're obligated to know these things. What's the point of this word for? What's it doing? Well, in a way, but he's saying, let me see if I can give you an analogy, that if I was to say, I could jump off this stage, and if I jumped off this stage, I would break my ankle, for I'm fat. So the word for there is doing what? It's explanation. It's tying the two together, right? It's like sometimes you see therefore in the Bible, and they always tell you to ask, what's the therefore? So there's a linking together here, okay? So now he's explaining to you more about verse 28. When he says that God is working it together for good, you say, what do you mean good? And he says, well, let's explain it in verse 29. For those whom he foreknew, and this is everything that word insinuates. It does not mean, by the way, that God just simply knows ahead of time who will or who won't be saved. This means that God actively foreknew someone from eternity past. There is a chosen here. There is an election here. God foreknew them. And those whom he foreknew, what did he do next? He predestined them. He set their destiny, right? I love that TV cartoon Bolt, whenever that little hamster's walking around and he says, ring, ring, you rang. Who is it? Destiny, right? You ever seen that?
Yes.
Okay, see? Quality. He's a great actor, that hamster. Anyway, or gerbil, I don't know what he is. Anyway, he set their destiny. And their destiny is what? In verse 29. To be conformed to the image of his Son. What is good? Okay, sanctification. Good is to be conformed to the image of his Son, right? Not only that, look at verse 30. And, you mean there's more good? Yes. Those whom he predestined, what did he do? He called. That's a draw to salvation. And those whom he called, what did he do? He justified. That's declaring them righteous. And those whom he justified, what did he do? Glorifies. That's the completion of salvation. Right? When we are now perfectly like Christ, we will never sin again. There's no longer a temptation. There's no longer a flesh. We are with him and sin is done. So now, when we read Romans 8:28, our temptation is to read our scenario into the story and say, God has promised this must work for good. And we like to fill in the blank and say, well, good means that I'm going to get more money or I'm going to get healthy or I'm going to whatever. And we like to fill in the blank of what we think is good. But when you read Romans 8, the good that God is promising is salvation. Okay? He works all things for salvation. This is the good. To conform people into Christ, to the glory and the honor of Christ, for a calling, a justification, a glorification. So when you get this idea that God is providentially at work, and he is providentially at work for what? For what? Say it louder. Salvation. Everybody say it. Salvation. Okay, yeah, this is what he's doing. Now, with that, turn back to Genesis 39. And we're going to pick back up in the Joseph and Judah saga. So we started off in Genesis 36, 37 really. And we have this story about Joseph and his brothers. And somebody tell me what's the problem going on between Joseph and his brothers? If you don't speak louder, I'm going to make you hold a microphone in worship. They hate him. Why do they hate him, Caleb? Because he's the favorite, right? How do you know he's the favorite, Abigail? Because he got a coat of many colors. I like the Bible says a vari-colored tunic, right? Yeah. So they hate him. And it's not just that the father loves him more. What else is going on in his life, Kiara? You remember something else happened? Oh, think about it. It was strike two, we said, why the brothers kept hating Joseph. You remember, Coda? What do you got, Tyler?
Because of all his dreams.
Oh, yeah, he had these dreams. What were they?
Like his brothers and everything's gonna bow down to him.
Oh, yeah. You're all going to bow down to me, right? That didn't help. So you've got this problem. He gave a bad report about his brothers. Then he's the favorite. Then he has this dream. You're all going to bow down to me. The brothers hate him. So when he's sent by his father to go check on the brothers have a plan immediately. And what's the plan? Kill him. Yeah. We're going to throw him in this well, and then we're going to kill him. But one brother has a change of heart. Not really a change of heart, but a change of plan. Who was that brother? Judah. And what was Judah's plan? Sell him. I mean, let's make a little money off of it, shall we? So they sell him to some Ishmaelites. They carry him into Egypt. And then the story leaves Joseph for a second and shifts its gaze over to Judah. Now, some of you guys weren't here for Judah last week. What do we know about Judah?
He's a good guy.
What'd you say?
He's a good guy.
He is not a good guy. Tell me something. Let's hear. Coda, tell me something about Judah that makes us know he's not a good guy. Something like that. He got his daughter-in-law pregnant, which is pretty bad. Yeah. So you have Judah, who first of all raised really bad sons. The first son was so bad, what did God do? Yeah, you're just out. I'm killing you. And the second son sinned before God, and what did God do to him? Killed him too. Yeah, you guys. So he's raising wicked, wicked sons. And then he promises the third son to the widow of the first son, but he never comes through with that. It was called the law of the levirate marriage. It doesn't come through with it, and so she dresses up like a hooker, and Judah goes in and sleeps with her, and she gets pregnant by her daddy-in-law. Not a good guy, right? Pagan, idol worshiper, sleeps with prostitutes, whole bad deal. Finds out later she's pregnant, and what's he want to do when he finds out she's pregnant?
Kill her.
How? What? Burn her, right? She's a harlot, burn her. It's amazing what a selective memory Judah has. She's a harlot, but he's not, right? So we're going to burn her. Then she says, well, this is the guy that got me pregnant. Do you recognize this staff or signet ring or seal? And he's like, you know, I've been wondering where those were, right? And so then what does he say? Yeah, she's more righteous than I. Judah has a change of heart. In fact, he has repentance, even salvation. And what does God do for Judah?
Gives him 2 more sons.
Yeah, it's this great echo going on. You two got it nailed, right? Gives them 2 more sons. So let me get this straight. Right now, where we're at, in Genesis 39, we've got a good son who there's no sin mentioned for him. That does not mean he never sinned, but there's no sin mentioned by him, about him in the Bible. He loves his father loves him. God has promised to do great things for his life. He's only ever done what he was told, and his brothers hated him for it. And despite his goodness, he got sold as a slave into Egypt, and God let it happen. And then we have the other brother who is a wicked, vile human being who raises wicked sons. He's actually the one that sold his brother. He sleeps with hookers, his daughter-in-law. And God has blessed him by returning sons to him, and he gets to live in the land of Israel scot-free. And we ask the question, how is that fair, right? It doesn't seem fair to us. And how many of us want fair in life? You don't want fair. If you get fair, God sends you to hell. Judah was saved by grace. We say, well, what do we do with this story about Joseph? Well, chapter 39, we're going to pick back up with the story about Joseph. Now, the reason we sang the songs we did tonight is because they were all about suffering. And they were all about how my perspective is going to shift and trust God no matter how bad the day gets, no matter how dark it gets. Now, we're going to read this story about Joseph. And I don't know what you've heard about the story of Joseph, but I would almost guarantee you've heard it wrong your whole life. Almost. Let's start with somebody reading Genesis 39, 1 through 6.
Now Joseph had to take him down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. He worked in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord wanted all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owed he put in his charge. And it came about that from the time he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate.
All right, stop right there. Okay, so Joseph goes down to Egypt. What happens? Caleb, what happens? Yeah, I know he gets sold. Who bought him? No, because we're reading and you're talking. You got to pay attention to me. I get real jealous about that sort of thing. So I'll make you sit up here. Potiphar buys him. Potiphar buys him, and what is the result after Potiphar buys him? The Lord blesses Potiphar. You see in verse 2 that the Lord is with Joseph. So Potiphar becomes a successful man. You see again in verse 3, the Lord was with him. And the Lord caused everything about Potiphar's to be blessed. And Joseph finds favor in the sight of everybody, and he gets made overseer. And everybody wants to read this story about Joseph and say, see, it all worked good for Joseph. And they want to go, ta-da, victory, right? And this is, everybody wants to tie this real happy bow on it. And like, see, it all worked good for Joseph. Yay, Joseph, right? God was with him, and God was with him, and that's the point. He has been sold into slavery. He has been sold into Egypt. He has been disowned by his brothers, but did he go alone? No, who went with him? God. Now, he's walking through some trials. He's been sold as a slave, a 14-year-old kid in a foreign land, and yet God is with him. And it's evident that God is with him. But don't read this story and say, oh, it's so wonderful. See, such a happy ending. Joseph is now the head of the master's house. Yay, Joseph, and you roll the movie credits. He's a 14-year-old kid that hasn't seen his dad or his family or his homeland. This is not a happy ending. He's doing well because God is blessing him, but it's not a happy ending. Joseph is in the midst of a foreign land, but God is with him. That's point number one. But you keep going. In verse 6, it starts with the word now, halfway through. Somebody read there through verse 10.
Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he is with him. But all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater than his husband and I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? As he spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her, but lied beside her again.
All right, so it starts off at the end of verse 6, and what does it say about Joseph? He was handsome in form and appearance. I want you to know that's a great burden to bear. It's a very difficult thing, right? Ole would know, right? It's hard. To be handsome in form and appearance. But there's a reason why Joseph is handsome in form and appearance. Why do you think God made Joseph handsome? That's the question. Do what? So this lady would want him. Everything that God is doing is providence. So you say, well, you know, why did God make me handsome? Why did God make me not? Why did God make me fast or slow or tall or skinny or whatever? Do you suppose it to be a mistake? It's not a mistake. God knows exactly what he's doing. And here Joseph is made handsome in form and appearance, so much so that the master's wife looks at him and says, you need to come and lay with me. But he refuses her. And again, now don't take the low-hanging fruit. If you're preaching through Genesis, don't take the low-hanging fruit. This chapter is not about sexual immorality and how Joseph is such a great example. He is, but that's not what this chapter is about. You have Joseph here who is doing everything right. Can you see that? Has Joseph sinned against God yet? No, in fact, he says in verse 9, how then could I do this great evil and sin against God? So the point of the story that the writer is making is, look, Joseph is suffering, but he is not suffering because he is sinning. Does that make sense? And this is what we call the prosperity gospel today. Prosperity gospel, read Job's friends all throughout Job. You must have done something or else you wouldn't be sinning like this. Anybody know the story of Job at all? Somebody give me the rundown. Aaron, give me the rundown of the story of Job.
Great guy worships God, and all these terrible things are happening. He's sick, it's all sin, and his children, his family, something still praises God. Like the devil's doing all these things, and God's like, you can do anything to kill him, and he's going to still face it.
Yeah, so Job, it says in chapter 1, he feared God and turned away from evil. God himself calls Job a righteous man. And Satan's like, yeah, but he's only righteous because you've blessed him so much. Take it away and he'll curse you. And God's like, well, try. So Satan takes it away. And then Job still doesn't curse God. He's like, yeah, but skin for skin. Let me put the boy in pain, and I promise you he'll curse you. And he says, fine, just don't kill him. And so Job gets all these boils, everything. His wife tells him, why don't you just curse God and die? I mean, you're a miserable little man. And Job says, you talk like one of the foolish women, right? Should we indeed accept prosperity from the Lord's hand and not adversity? So anyway, Job is a righteous man, but he suffers. Well, his friends all come along, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and they all come up, and they all have really one question for Job. I mean, it's like 20 chapters, but it's one question over and over. And the question is basically this: what did you do? Right? Because God wouldn't have let you suffer like that if you hadn't have done something wrong. And they just start taking shots in the dark. We know you did something. We know you. What did you do, Job? And that's the way the world thinks. That's the way the prosperity gospel operates, that they think that basically your amount of wealth versus your amount of poverty, or your amount of health versus your amount of sickness, must somehow be uniquely tied to your level of obedience or disobedience. That if God lets something bad happen to you, it must be because you sinned. I mean, Cody's wearing a knee brace, so we all know who the biggest sinner in here is tonight, right? He must have, because I'm not wearing a knee brace, right? So clearly Cody offended God and I did not. And people actually think that way. And you say, yeah, but that's stupid. And that's true. However, you will be prone in your life, I don't know if Cody's gone here or not, but most people do at some point, when they get bad news or they get some sort of injury or they're in pain or their finances get bad, somewhere in the back of their mind they will wonder, God, what have I done to offend you? Why did you let this happen to me? Why did you bring this trial to me? Did I do something wrong? Did I sin? Did I mess up? And that's sort of the reasoning that goes throughout this prosperity gospel. But let's crush that here. Joseph is righteous, but Joseph is suffering. Can you see that? I mean, that's clear. He won't sin, but he's suffering. Now, if this were a Hallmark movie, and Joseph got sold by his brothers into slavery, but he goes into slavery, and he's the best little slave you ever saw, and God is with him, and God is blessing Potiphar, and everything's getting wealthy, and he's the head of the household, and the wife comes in and lays this temptation trap for him, but he resists and says, I will not sin against God, I will not offend God. No. What do you expect to happen in the Hallmark version of the story? Do what? Well, not yet. Potiphar catches wind that his wife tried to seduce Joseph and says, I knew there was something wrong with you, woman. Be gone from me. Joseph, you're such an honorable man. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the great wealth which you have helped me earn, and I'm going to take you back to Israel, and we will go with my army because I'm the captain of the bodyguard, and we will slay your brothers and return you to your father, and you'll be the most powerful man in Canaan. Right? That's how they end. That's how Hollywood ends, right? Well, let's see how it goes for Joseph. Let's look at verse 11. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household were there inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, See, he's brought in a Hebrew for us to make sport of us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. So she left his garment beside her until his master came home, and she spoke to him with these words, The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me, and as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Now when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, This is what your slave did to me, his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the jail. Flat out lied, didn't she? There's not a shred of truth to her story. Why in the world is God letting this stuff happen to Joseph? I mean, all he's ever done is obey God. All he's ever done is do what he's told. Dad told him to go meet his brothers, so he did. Got him thrown in a well. Then got him sold. Then he just worked hard and wouldn't sin against God by sleeping with this woman, so she lied about it, and now he's in jail. And we say, but God causes all things to work together for good to those that love God, who are called according to his purpose. And it doesn't look like those mesh, do they? It doesn't look like they mesh if good means you don't go to jail, or if good means you never get treated as a slave, or if good means you never get lied about. Perhaps that's not what God means. Good means what? Romans 8. I made you think your salvation. Good means salvation. So, Joseph has a rough turn. But we come to verse 21. 21 through 23. Somebody read that.
But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there he was responsible for. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made him prosper.
So, Joseph was a slave, but he was the best slave, and everything prospered. And then he got lied about and thrown into jail, but he's the best prisoner. And what happens? He gets put in charge of the whole jail, and the jail prospers, and everything is going good, and we say, there's the happy ending. Really? That's the happy ending? Joseph's still in jail every night? Joseph's still not in his homeland? Joseph's still away from his father? That's the happy ending? No. And somebody's already fast-forwarding in their mind saying, no, I know the happy ending. He's going to get out, and he's going to go be the number 2 guy in Egypt, and he's going to ascend to great power, and he's going to be, Pharaoh's right-hand man, and then we'll say, that's the happy ending. Is that the happy ending? Do you realize that even when he ascends to be the number 2 guy in Egypt, he is still a slave? He is still in a foreign land. He is still separated from his family. Joseph's not going back. He's never going to go back to the land. He is going to get reconciled with his father because the father will come into Egypt. But Joseph was sold into slavery to Egypt at age 14, and he never quits being a slave of Egypt. Never. Treated well? Sure. Prosperous? Yes. But the happy ending, that good, never comes. Because good is not the way we fill out the story. Good is not what we think is good. Good is what God says is good. And good is what? Salvation. Why did God send Joseph to his brothers that day? Because he knew they would sell him into slavery. Why did he get sold to Potiphar? Because he knew Potiphar had a carnal wife. Why was Joseph so good looking? So that wife would be attracted to him. Why was Joseph a man of repute and not a man of ill character that would do it? So that he would get lied about. Why did God allow him to be lied about? So that he'd get thrown into prison. Why is he in prison? You're going to see next week. He's going to meet 2 guys, a cupbearer and a baker. He's going to interpret their dreams. He's still going to rot in prison for a while until he finally comes out. And this is all God's plan to do what? Salvation, right? Now, here's what's so hard for us to grasp in the providence of God. Chapter 38 that we read about Judah, the story about Judah and his sons die, and then he goes and sleeps with his daughter-in-law thinking she's a prostitute, and she ends up having children, replaces Judah's 2 sons that he lost, and God ends up blessing Judah. Chapter 38 is happening at the same time chapter 39 through 41 is happening. Which means, right now, in chapter 39, while Joseph is being sold to Potiphar and he's a slave in the house he's being lied about, right now, Judah's still a bad guy. He hadn't had that whole eye-opening experience yet. He's still raising wicked sons. He's still a bad guy. And so you have simultaneously Judah running in a path of immorality and Joseph walking in truth but suffering for it. And they're happening at the same time. And we look at that and say, I don't understand how God can let this happen, because God's plan is not revolved around your happiness. Now, is it happy to serve the Lord? Yes. Is it worth it? Yes. But the payoff for the service of the Lord is not guaranteed to come in this life. Do you understand this? We are rewarded, and it is worth it. But there's no guarantee that the payoff comes here. And so many people want to follow Christ, but they want to follow him for a payoff today. They want to follow him so that I'll get blessing today, so that life will go easy today. I want to reacquaint you with exactly what Jesus called you to. Because most of the time you ask people, what does Jesus want for you? And they're like, oh, he wants me to go to heaven. Some people, blessing, wealth, prosperity, healing. I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16. And we'll start in verse 21 of Matthew 16. It says in verse 21, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples. Now understand this. They know he's the Messiah. In fact, a few verses previous to that, Peter announced him to be the Christ, the Son of the living God. John told him he was the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. They understand, at least to some extent, that he's the Messiah. They understand that he's the Son of David. They understand he's the reigning king. They get that. But there's part of it they don't understand. They do not yet understand his atoning death. And so in verse 21, Jesus is about to break the news to them. Okay? This may not be headed where you guys think it's headed, at least not immediately. He says, he began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised on the third day. Now, I want you to put yourself in the disciples' shoes. Jesus walks by and you think you have found the Son of David, the Messiah, the King of Israel. And you say, you know what? I'm following the King of Israel. Now, why would you latch on to follow the King of Israel? Because he's going to be the King of Israel, right? I mean, it's bound to pay off pretty well, isn't it? It's bound to do pretty good for me. I'll be one of the king's men. Yeah, when he comes in here and whips Rome, I'm going to be the right-hand guy. But all of a sudden, this king you're following, and I mean, you're just walking down the road with him everywhere he's going, like, I believe in this guy. He's got it all figured out. And he says, oh, by the way, guys, we're headed to Jerusalem. When I get there, I'm going to suffer many things. They're going to kill me, and I'm going to raise from the dead. And this is where Peter jumps in, verse 22. Peter took him aside. It's like kind of grabs Jesus by the arm and says, come with me for just a second. And Peter began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord, this shall never happen to you. Now, why is Peter saying that? Because he cares so much about Jesus that he doesn't want to see him die? Why does Peter not want Jesus to go to Jerusalem, suffer, and die?
Because he's supposed to be the guy who leads Rome.
Yeah, I'm following you. Change of plans, perhaps? Let's not do that. What if we say we did, but we don't, right? Don't talk that way. You're the King of Israel. You're the Son of David. We'll have no more of this suffering and death talk. We don't want to hear this. Look at Jesus, verse 23. He turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You know you're having a bad day when Jesus calls you Satan. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but your own. There is a providential plan of God in play. And Peter, you don't care about it at all. All you care about are your own interests. Now, could you see how easy that could happen to Joseph? Right? That could happen easily, right? Get me out of this prison. Get me out of this slavery. Get me out of here. This ain't fair. Call my dad, right? But God has a plan in place. So he tells Peter, you got to follow. Now here it comes in verse 24. Do you want to know? This is the invitation, the calling of Jesus. Are you ready? Matthew 16:24. Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone, would that qualify as you? Would that qualify as me? Do we fall under the category of anyone? Pretty sure. If anyone wishes to come after me, that means if you want to follow me, you want to be one of mine, there's a threefold criteria here. Are you ready? What's the first one? All right, you got to let your plan go. I don't know what your plans and dreams and hopes and aspirations and expectations are, but drop them. Because we're not on your providential plan, we're on my providential plan. You have to deny yourself. Secondly, what?
Take the cross.
Now, this is a phrase that has sort of lost its luster in our day because, somebody, I've had a head cold all week, and I'll say, yeah, but it's just the cross I had to bear, right? Or we have a rough job, it's just the cross I have to bear. That is not what Jesus means. In Jesus' day, the cross is an unmistakable symbol. It is the Roman-invented torture device to keep people from rebelling against Rome. They have mastered the art of killing people in such a painful and slow and humiliating way that to see someone die on a cross would crush any thoughts of insurrection. On the cross, you hang there naked, for one, and some people could live for over a week on the cross. That's pretty humiliating to hang there. You've seen all the stories of the birds plucking out eyes and all that kind of stuff. It's a horrible thing. They drive the nails in your hands and in your feet, but when you die on the cross, it's because they drop you in the hole and it pulls your shoulders out of socket. So the way you die on the cross is by suffocation. And what they've done is they've devised a way that you have to pull against the nails to raise up and get a breath, and then you hang back down. And so it pits your fight for life against this terrible pain. And so some people, would live for literally a week on the cross, just get air and then hang back down. And so it's just this horribly gruesome, humiliating way. In fact, in the Bible times, in Jesus' day, to even say the word cross was a vulgar term. So like if you went home from school one day and you told your mom you saw a cross, she'd wash your mouth out with lye, because they didn't have soap yet, so they would use lye, right? They'd wash your mouth out with it. And don't talk about that. Which is remarkable when Paul shows up and he says, I'm not talking about anything but the cross, right? I determined to know nothing except Jesus Christ and him crucified. So when Jesus tells his disciples, you have to deny yourself and take up his cross, that's an unmistakable imagery. I ask you a question. When Jesus is calling you after him, what is he calling you to do? Die. He's calling you to die. Does that mean everyone who follows Jesus dies a martyr's death? No, they don't. But that's the calling. He's calling you to die. You're going to have to let go of your plans, Peter, deny yourself. You're going to have to pick up that cross, and you're going to have to what? Come with me. This is where we're going. This is the plan. If you wish to save your life, what? You'll lose it. You want to hang on to your plan and your dreams and your life, Peter? Kiss it goodbye. But if you'll let go of your life for my sake, what will you find? You'll find life. There is life on the other side of this, Peter, that you can't comprehend. And then comes logic from Jesus. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? It's an important question here. How much profit would it be worth if you knew it was going to cost you your soul at the end? Could I pay you $50 to go to hell? You wouldn't go to hell for $50? $200. You go to hell for $200? $1,000, Tyler. We give you $1,000. You agree to go to hell for $1,000? I think you're like, that's stupid, right? All right, $1 million. Go to hell for $1 million? No, Jasmine? What if I could give you the whole world? If I could give you the whole world, all the wealth, all the fame, all the power, the whole world, would you be willing? You're going to get to enjoy it. How old are you, Aaron? 16 years old. So, if you live to be 116, you got 100 more years of it, right? That's how you do quick math. So, you get 80 more years, 70 more years of enjoying it all. I give it all to you. The only catch is you go to hell at the end. If I give you the whole world, you go to hell for it. You say, no. That's the easy one. Look at the next question. Or, verse 26, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Would you pay $50 to not go to hell? Would you pay $200 to not go to hell? Would you pay $1,000 to not go to hell? How about $1 million? Would you give up this world to not go to hell. I say, everybody says that. Oh, yeah. But look at it. That's what he's asking. Deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me. You cannot keep this life. Everything that you have in your mind of what you deserve and your, Hallmark movie script and your cookie cutter life and all of your bucket list and all of those plans and dreams and aspirations, and this is what I'm going to do with my life. Do you understand what he's asking here? Take all of that, wad it up, and chunk it. Put it in your bucket list bucket, set the bucket on fire, and kick the bucket. That's what he's saying. It's not your plan anymore. It's my plan. And my plan will take you where I want you to go. Does that mean everybody that follows Jesus goes into slavery and prison? No. Does that mean everybody that follows Jesus gets crucified on a cross? No. Everybody that follows Jesus dies a martyr's death? No, that doesn't happen to everybody, but does it happen? It does. And how would you know if that's you or not? You wouldn't. You wouldn't. God gets to write the story. And you say, yeah, but why would God possibly have any benefit in selling me into slavery? Why would there be any benefit in putting me in prison? Why would there be any benefit in having me falsely accused? Because God's plan of providence is working for good. And what is good? Salvation. He's working a plan to save his children. And the question that we're up against now through Joseph, even through Peter, the question we're up against is, can God use your life for his plan to save his children? It's a big question. Can God use your life in his plan to save his children? That's what he's asking Peter. Peter doesn't like the plan. Peter, you don't like it. He's going to run against it again in John 20. Jesus is going to tell Peter, there's coming a day when they're going to bind you and take you where you don't want to go. And Peter's going to say, well, what about him? Talking about John. And Jesus will say, if I want John to live till I come back, what's that to you? You follow me. Peter, can I have your life? Can I use your life however I see fit for the fulfillment of my plan of salvation? Does anybody know anything about the death of Peter? It's not in the Bible, but church history teaches us. What do you know about the death of Peter? Yeah, he was crucified upside down. He first watched the crucifixion of his wife and stood at her feet while she died, reminding her to trust the Lord, trust the Lord. And then when Peter was crucified, he said he was not worthy to die like his Lord. And they crucified Peter upside down. It came to fruition. He literally denied himself, took up his cross, and followed Jesus. And that happens. Sometimes we get sheltered from it in our, United States American comfort society, but there's people all over the world that suffer for Christ. What I want to lay before you through the story of Joseph and even this calling of Peter is I want you to understand that the calling is the same for everybody. He doesn't say, here's the deal. We have 3 tiers of salvation. We have the fanatic salvation, those that are all in on Jesus and they'll go anywhere and do anything and their life is nothing to them. And those people are what we call the fanatic Christians. And then we have the faithful Christians, and they're not going to get into the fanatic crazy stuff, but they will go to church every time the doors are open. And then we just have sort of what we might call the barely Christians. They ask Jesus into their heart, they got baptized, and they'll show up at church once every 7 years. And we think that we can sign up and say, I'll take tier C, please. I still want to live my life. I've got plans. This is what I want to do. I'll take tier C. I don't want in the faithful part. And some people say, no, I will do the faithful part. That sounds good to me. I think that's plenty to ask. But in people, I don't want the fanatic part. You understand there are no tiers. There are no levels. It's all in or not. You either follow him or you don't. That's it. You can't go in 2 directions at once. And what you're beginning to see with Joseph is the same thing that you see in Christianity, that our God is providentially at work, and he's at work to save sinners. He's at work to save you, and he's at work to save his children. And the calling for our life is to be usable and used at his exposure however he sees fit. Now, Joseph is getting what we would perceive to be a bad rap. Slave, prisoner. But now go back and read the story of Joseph again. One thing we see continually with Joseph, whether he's a slave or a prisoner, we see the same reality. And what's the reality we see over and over? What's it say about it? Got it? The Lord is with him. 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 And the Lord causes his way to prosper. There's a grace, and there's a help, and there's a strength, even in the midst of trial, even in the midst of hardship, even in the midst of suffering. The Lord does not abandon him. This is not some, I'm going to kick you out there and you better make it. The Lord goes with him. And so what I want you to understand, this calling of Jesus, when he says, deny yourself and take up your cross, he doesn't say, deny yourself, take up your cross, and take off up that hill with it, and whatever happens, we'll see. He says, deny yourself, take up your cross, and come with me. Come with me. I'll be with you. You'll be with me. And whatever you face, you will face with me. I will not abandon you. I will not forsake you. I will not leave you. This is part of my plan to save sinners, and I want you to be a part. When you read the life of Joseph, it forces us to ask questions of ourselves. Is my life at the disposal of God? Have I surrendered my life to him for whatever means he sees fit? Will I let go of my plans and dreams and aspirations and all the things that I think life owes me? Will I let him have that? Will I follow Jesus? Can I deny myself, take up a cross, and go after him? This is the constant call of Christianity. You won't find anywhere in the Bible where Jesus says, do you want to go to heaven? He'll ask you, will you follow me? And that's the call. Joseph sort of forces us to face that reality. Now, God's not finished. And God's going to use Joseph in a mighty way. But you can see that it was the plan of God to walk him through a time of really hard stuff. But it's all that he might save. It's all for good. And that's where the faith comes in. Does that make sense? So the question is, are you following Jesus? And if you're not, will you? You have to come to him. So let's close in prayer tonight. We'll start down there with Quincy and work our way around.
Dear Lord, please help me with you. May God teach us to just follow you, to follow us.
Thank you for letting us gather here today and give us peace, which let us apply to our lives. Dear Lord, please help us to remember that everything we do is for your glory.
Father, we praise you because you're good. We do pray that you would help us to follow you. We pray for faith, and we thank you for your promise that you never leave us or forsake us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.